Is that how you want it? Okay. That's all right. Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all tonight and to be on our home turf, the Heritage Center, right? I'm Sherry Jones, Executive Director of the Historical Society. It is a pleasure to have you here and an honor to welcome Sheffield Hale, the President and CEO of the Atlanta History Center. I started as director in 2010, and I had no professional museum experience at the time. I was actively looking for a role model as I learned my new position, and Sheffield was one of them. You all may remember the story of the cyclorama, which drew attention around 2011 when the new mayor of Atlanta added it to a list of things to dispose of. The cyclorama is a unique and very large painting depicting the Battle of Atlanta, which had fallen into disrepair. Sheffield was the chair of the committee charged with deciding how to dispose of the painting and other moth-eaten relics. Instead, as the new president of the Atlanta History Center in 2012, Sheffield had the ambitious vision to save the cyclorama. Under his leadership, the center raised $35 million to restore the painting, to create a new building to house it, and then relocate it to the Atlanta History Center. I was inspired and amazed by the scale of the project and the leadership that it took to get it done. Today, the Atlanta History Center uses the restored work of art and the history of the painting itself to talk about the big picture. To me, this is museum education at its finest, using historical resources and research to tell a fuller and more accurate story, and to provide context for the issues and the questions that Americans are discussing in their daily lives. Our own work here at the Coastal Georgia Historical Society strives to follow that example of employing all available resources to pursue excellence and relevance in the lives of members and visitors. The cyclorama is just one example of Sheffield's forward-thinking leadership and his commitment to dialogue and engagement with history. Sheffield is a real Georgian. He studied history at the University of Georgia, and after becoming a lawyer, worked as chief counsel of the American Cancer Society in Atlanta. He served on many boards and commissions for historic preservation, cultural, and civic organizations. In recognition, he's been named in various media as one of Georgia's and Atlanta's 100 most influential people. Over the years, I've continued to follow Sheffield's work. Since 2016, he's been leading an initiative to produce a Confederate monument interpretation guide. The guide provides historical information and tools for communities deciding what to do with monuments or named places. The documentary Monument, which was launched earlier this year, builds on this work to examine the story of the carving on Stone Mountain. Last week, I was talking to a member about tonight's program, and they thought they might not agree with Sheffield. And that's okay, because the goal of this evening is not to agree. What we hope to do is inspire learning and conversation about some difficult history that we all share. Please join me in welcoming Sheffield to introduce the Atlanta History Center's film, Monument. Thank
you. Okay, so I don't expect people to agree with me, and I never try to change anybody's mind because that doesn't work. But what we try to do with the Confederate Monument Initiative and this is just to give people the opportunity to see things they don't know, new opportunity for new perspective, and to learn a history that they might not have realized that existed. And then you or they can decide what to do about it. In terms of the Confederate Monument Initiative, we got deeply involved into that, And what we did was, the idea was, let's give people the tools to decide themselves in their own communities what to do, how to research it, what are the issues that are there, what are people doing in other communities, and it was sort of a self-service kind of thing. But we're not going to tell you in Glenn County what to do with your monuments, because nobody wants anybody from Atlanta telling them what to do, particularly people in Glenn County. I know because my mother's from Americus, and my cousin's down there, there's no way. And we don't want to do that, because it's a community issue. Now, why would I be so stupid as to take on a topic as hot as Stone Mountain? Well, I like poking snakes, but I also, it's also about, we did the cyclorama, which had a lot of issues around it, and I think we navigated that pretty well. Hope you can come see it, and that's a whole nother talk we can talk about. We also own the Margaret Mitchell House. And if you want to think of the trinity of lost cause or Confederate memory issues in Atlanta, it's Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind, it's the cyclorama, and it's Stone Mountain. And so why not complete the three? And so that's what we've been doing. And so with this, what we did was, and the reason we got into the Confederate monument business, it became a hot topic nationwide after the massacre in Charleston. And that's when we got engaged in 2016. Then 2017, we had Charlottesville, and it ramped that up again. And so we were trying to, and there's a lot of heat on that. We're just trying to put the facts out and give people tools to deal with that. Then cyclorama came around, so we did and then we did cyclorama. And then what we did was, we said, well, we can't address these Confederate monuments all over the place and not deal with Stone Mountain in our backyard. So we came up with a white paper that we wrote, we came up with a timeline, and we learned a lot. I learned a lot that I didn't know about Stone Mountain. So what I hope you'll watch the film tonight, see if there's some things you didn't know, and then let's talk about it, because we're not proposing any solution in this film. We want to get the facts out to people in a way that is, they can receive it. Now, what I was doing for a while was going around and terrorizing people with PowerPoint presentations. Rotary clubs, I did one for the University of Georgia Alumni Association on Zoom during that period. And then we decided, there's one of the things about museums is a lot of times they focus on bringing people to you, which we all want, but that's not our completion of our mission. We're also in archives. We want to get the information out and to places where people can receive it, where they want to receive it, when they want to receive it, and how they want to receive it. And which drove us to digital. And then it also happened to be in about the same time as COVID came in. And we set up a digital department to do just that. And this is our first product. I learned a lot of patience, because this took 2 years. I thought it was, I went in and I hired somebody and I said, here, Christian, here is my PowerPoint, here's our white paper, and here's our timeline. Can you do something with this? And this is the result. And we're going to do more. We've got a podcast coming out later. We've got little short films and other things that we've been doing. But this is our first full-length documentary, 32 minutes. And we felt that was just long enough. So why don't we go ahead and start that, and then afterwards you can tell me what you think. All right, and I'm all ears. Thank you.
It is literally the largest Confederate monument in the world. And it's the largest Confederate monument in the world right on the doorstep of Atlanta. And that is really weird.
They're considered the three greatest heroes of the Confederacy: Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, and Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson.
The carving recesses in 42 feet, and each head is about 90 feet tall. So the carving takes in several football fields.
Among all of the monuments or memorials to the Confederacy, Stone Mountain is truly unique.
The Confederate monuments issue is complicated.
In the laws that established the park, it is established as a memorial to the Confederacy.
So a lot of people, when they think about Stone Mountain Park in particular, and the carving, they think that it's a lot older than it is.
The carving was not finished until the early 1970s, so it's really a relatively recent thing.
It's not about the Civil War. It really is about a much more recent period in our nation's past.
After nearly half a century of work, the memorial carving here at Stone Mountain is finally finished, and officials are calling it the eighth wonder of the world.
You know, it's a monument to the Confederacy. It's a monument to people who wanted to succeed because they did not want to live in a country where you could not enslave people.
Besides being a Confederate memorial, it was also the place where the rebirth of the Ku Klux Klan came about.
Little children, along with 3,000 robed Klansmen and their women auxiliaries, gather in Georgia, where the society was founded, to initiate into their ranks 700 new members.
I've always been proud of being from the South. I've never shied away from it. But I also have to realize that a lot of the people don't even look at the South being for me. Like, am I considered a Southerner, you know?
Save the money! Save the flags! Save the heritage!
There's nothing hate about it, it's all heritage.
When they say heritage, what is it that they're lifting up?
Heritage is history with all the bad parts left out.
Well, 40% of Southerners were enslaved during the Civil War, and that certainly was not their heritage.
Though we think of Stone Mountain as a Civil War memorial, nothing from the Civil War actually happened there.
This is not a battlefield. This is not a cemetery. This is a relic of a political battle that was lost as surely as the Confederacy lost its war against the United States of America. The monument, as we know it today, really took shape as a result of Marvin Griffin's campaign for so-called massive resistance to integration.
As long as I am your governor, there will be no breakdown in the pattern of segregation in this state.
But a lot of people just don't even know. They don't understand. They don't understand that Stone Mountain, as well as many Confederate monuments all over this country, were very intentionally placed to keep Black people in their places.
The people who created the carving, that's what they had in mind, and they were very explicit about that.
We didn't come down here to apologize, got it?
They want to erase our history because they want to erase us.
They go to Stone Mountain and they see that sculpture, and they know what it means. They know what it stands for. They know the point of it.
It's not about all the other negative things that are being put in the media. It's about honoring the soldiers who fought for their cause, for their lives, their families.
It is a monument to say that we are a state that believed in the values of the Confederacy.
We should not erase history. At the same time, we don't have to revere that history.
That's a space that's controlled by the state of Georgia, and that's a place that memorializes and gives reverence to people who fought for a version of the country that we reject today.
So every day we wake up and we still have that law in the books is a day where the state of Georgia is reaffirming its commitment to those values.
Does this park, memorializing the Confederacy, represent where we as Georgians want to be in the 21st century? That's what we have to deal with.
my dad had many skills.
Okay, here we go. She'll fall right in here.
But he wasn't an artist in the fact that he sculptured anything prior to working on Stone Mountain.
We will now establish this point from Jefferson Davis's hand over to Robert E. Lee's hand.
Once he became the chief carver, he kept a diary every day, along with 8x10 glossy black and white photos, where he showed what happened each and every day on that mountain. Daddy invested all of his 8 years, 5 months, and 19 days on the side of that mountain. He risked losing his life on a daily basis.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing us to come and share my dad's legacy with you.
Just like I think Daddy was destined to complete that carving, I think I'm destined to share about him completing that carving.
Every day, Daddy raised and lowered a Confederate flag. And unfortunately, I do not have one single flag.
And I want people to value that carving because I want them to value my dad's life and all the other men who risked their life to accomplish such a gigantic masterpiece.
Stone Mountain is a place where we can think about the memory of the Civil War. It's not really where we go to think about the history of the Civil War because nothing from the Civil War happened there. It's really about the way in which the war was memorialized.
Defeat came as an almost unimaginable shock for the true believers in the Confederate cause. They had gone to war thinking that victory was inevitable. And now they're looking at a situation where they've endured all this suffering, all this devastation, the grief of their sons and fathers and brothers having been killed and maimed. And people are looking around and saying, what is the reason? There must be a reason. And the reason they came up with was, well, we didn't really lose.
And a very different narrative about what the war was about emerged from the perspective of the losers of that war, from white Southerners.
I was in high school before I learned really that the South had lost the Civil War because the way everybody talked about it, we'd won it.
Now, the Confederates say we did lose militarily, but in the process, we won a moral victory. So how can you say that there's anything wrong with that? Just because you won, the Confederates say, that doesn't mean you were right. So this is what we call the myth of the lost cause.
When Edward Pollard writes his book called The Lost Cause, he's already reinterpreting the Civil War, and he says what the war did not decide, the Southern people still cling to. And he meant Southern white people. So they were clinging to those symbols that they felt represented a just cause.
It was a myth and not the truth of what happened in the state or in the South.
Now, mind you, in this whole thing of the lost cause, we're not really talking about emancipation here. It's almost as if African Americans and that whole experience didn't happen.
That lost cause myth also was to directly intimidate Black people living in the South.
Stone Mountain is an emblem of that mythology and of that kind of history being written by the losers.
Davis, Lee, and Jackson become the sort of holy trinity of the lost cause, and that's why they're on the side of Stone Mountain.
The intention was to weaponize art in support of a false ideology.
So whether it's a flag or a street name or it's a monument, it's all imbued with that.
It creates a field of fear, and I don't understand why anybody would want to create that type of culture.
Confederates say It wasn't about slavery. All we were doing was standing up for our rights as guaranteed in the Constitution. It was about state rights.
Yeah, it was about states' right, the right of a state to allow slavery. The truth is that the war was fought for slavery. Slavery was an inhumane and a cruel institution.
And so Stone Mountain is a monument and allegiance to individuals who believed that that was okay, that you could have individuals enslaved. We must recognize what that means. It means that we have an allegiance to individuals who are inhumane, who fought. Yes, they fought, they did. They fought valiantly to hold on to an inhumane system. And that's something that we cannot celebrate.
This great organization known as the Ku Klux Klan.
Burn, nigger, burn.
Listen, the South has a long history in race, and to a large part, race was from the very first of the founding of Georgia. And we have to recognize that. Georgia was founded as a non-slave state. That needs to be taught. That needs to be taught that there was a good portion of Georgia that did not agree with secession. I had a great-grandfather who fought for the Confederacy, but I also had another great-grandfather from the same community that fought for the Union. We simply have tried to twist history toward one view. Well, lay it all out. Let folks tell the true story, but we're not telling the true story. Now, we're certainly not telling it at Stone Mountain.
Today, Stone Mountain is one of the most visited of all parks in Georgia.
It's this beautiful landscape that really is unmatched. People use the park. They use it for recreation, for picnics, for getting out with the family.
But it's also this bizarre entertainment center that has, dinosaurs and a train going around it and golf course and conference center. It is no longer a monument to the Confederacy. In reality, it's a theme park.
But you still have that looming in the background, that memorialization, that purpose for which the park was purchased by the state.
Stone Mountain was already a tourist attraction even before the Civil War. So it seemed like a natural place to put a monument because everyone would see it there.
The founding force behind Stone Mountain was Helen Plain, a Confederate widow. And she thought that Stone Mountain would be the perfect place to have a massive carving. And she was part of this whole United Daughters of the Confederacy movement to memorialize the Confederacy.
The United Daughters of the Confederacy began as a way for the wives and mothers of Confederate soldiers to keep their graves clean.
Soon after the war and into the 1870s, most of the monuments were about commemorating the dead. So they're in cemeteries, relatively private places.
And then after Reconstruction ends and federal troops are no longer in the region, the building of Confederate monuments takes on a different tone.
When you look historically at the timeline and when Confederate monuments were being erected, it was after the failing of Reconstruction.
There's a lot of racial violence. There's an epidemic of lynching.
And when we started to see the separate but equal and Jim Crow policies begin to be enacted, these moments were inspiration for the creation of more than 700 Confederate monuments nationwide.
And they go into very public places, courthouse squares, main streets, places where you can't miss them.
And there were monuments that showed that the people who had lost the war were now back in charge.
And more than that, to enshrine the landscape with their heroes and with their claim of truth. But what really taints Stone Mountain is its association with the Ku Klux Klan.
William Joseph Simmons, one-time salesman of ladies' garters, in this rare newsreel film, leads his followers up Stone Mountain in Georgia for the first initiation ceremony of the reincarnated Klan.
There was a movie called Birth of a Nation that came out that really resurrected the Ku Klux Klan.
And this is the inspiration for the group of men from Atlanta who go up to the top of Stone Mountain and declare that the Ku Klux Klan is now reformed, and they burn a cross to mark the occasion.
It's just fascinating to see how these two issues are related.
Sam Venable, who owned the mountain, was one of the original members, and Helen Plain even suggested that some figures of the Ku Klux Klan should be included.
So she started fundraising around it. She got people involved. She got Gutzen Borglum involved.
Gutzen Borglum was the original carver, later carved Mount Rushmore. So it was a big project. It was a popular project, and it was nationally popular. There was national support from white people across the country for this carving effort.
So by 1925, Borglum had only gotten as far as carving the head of Lee in profile onto the side of the mountain. Bottom line is, the Confederate Memorial Association fires him. Then they turn right around and they hire another sculptor by the name of Augustus Lukeman. Now Lukeman starts over again, but it's a slightly smaller scale, and it's just below the unfinished head of Lee, which Lukeman has blasted off the side of the mountain. In any event, by 1928, the association was out of money, out of options, because the 12-year lease on the carving site was up.
And so everything, all carving efforts ceased.
And at this point in 1928, it was considered something of a public embarrassment because they hadn't been able to finish it.
I remember quite well my mother and father having very tense discussions about whether or not we should go to Stone Mountain. My mother was, in a social club, and they like to have picnics and what have you. And so when our club decided they wanted to host a family picnic at Stone Mountain, my father refused. He says, "I'm not going to Stone Mountain." And he says, "That's where the Klan organized." As a kid, you don't quite understand because our parents kept us very sheltered from the kind of vestiges of segregation. But it was clear that my father, who had grown up in Vidalia, Georgia, had moved to Atlanta, who had served in the Navy, had very strong opinions about what it meant to be black in a segregated society, and to what certain symbols meant. And so the symbolism of Stone Mountain, not just the monument, but just the idea of my mother wanting to take her children to Stone Mountain for an excursion, for something that was fun, he found that to be just terribly disturbing, because when he thought of Stone Mountain, he thought of the Klan.
The last vestige of states' rights guaranteed by the Second Amendment to the Constitution is gone. The second reconstruction of the South is now underway.
In 1954, 57 days after the decision of Brown versus the Board of Education, Marvin Griffin, who was running for governor of Georgia, made a campaign promise to buy Stone Mountain and restart the carving.
The Stone Mountain that we know today is really a story about civil rights and the era of civil rights, when Georgia and other states throughout the South and the Deep South were going through a period of intense reaction to efforts to transform the segregated South.
Segregation was about oppressing black people and keeping people separate. Brown versus Board ruled that separate but equal is literally not possible. So segregation was acceptance of a system that kept people separate and kept them inherently unequal.
That was the political impetus that gave rise to a renewed effort to remember a certain version of the Civil War and to commemorate it and to finish this carving that had been started half a century earlier.
The fight against integration really relit the fire under the Stone Mountain Carving Project.
And I know that there's a lot of people who think that the Confederacy and this monument represent their heritage. But what I like to remind people is that when we're talking about what this monument represents, it represents massive resistance to federally mandated integration.
They used the Confederacy as their symbol, rallying cry to oppose the federal government.
There are all kinds of legislation that's being passed in response to the Supreme Court's decision. And one of the things that the legislature is also doing is putting the Confederate battle emblem on the state flag.
To kind of assert their claim of state rights and the right of self-determination, because that's what they felt the Confederate cause was about.
They were clinging to those symbols that they felt represented a just cause. But it's now a battle in a different context. A battle against civil rights, a battle to maintain white supremacy.
So from 1956 through 2001, the Confederate battle flag remained on the Georgia state flag, even during the Olympics, and even with all the efforts that have been made to remove it.
While I was governor, I took the Confederate battle emblem off the Georgia flag, which was about 3/4 of the flag. After you looked into the history and considered it, how could you have a state symbol where a third of the population was offended by it? The backlash was the most overwhelming thing I've ever seen. I thought we were over the issue of race by 2001, and we were not. And it taught me that race was just under the surface in many of the things that we consider as to being progress and prosperity.
In the political bargain that came with changing the state flag came the legal stipulation that Confederate monuments in the state of Georgia, explicitly calling out Stone Mountain, could not be removed or altered in any way.
It started probably when I first went to a Decatur protest. I think it was my first protest ever, and it was about the Confederate obelisk. I walked by all the time. I never realized that it was a Confederate monument until Beacon Hill Black Alliance for Human Rights began passing out flyers. That obelisk was, put there during a time when the South and people empowering the South were putting up all types of Confederate monuments in public spaces. And so how can you tell me that that's not in direct correlation to trying to intimidate Black Southerners, It's perfectly okay to say that you're proud of where you come from and talk about your roots here. But at the same time, if your history is also linked to the direct traumas and pains of a whole other group of people who also live in the South and also have roots in the South, then you should consider why that is disrespectful to put up monuments and wear Confederate flag memorabilia all the time. When I got the call that they were removing the monument, I could not believe that they had actually listened to us. I realized that this was just the first step of me continuing that effort to create a more united America, that I wanted to see a better future But if you want that, you have to get involved in advocacy work.
The history of the Civil War and the way it's been remembered has always been a part of the way we have fought over race and equality in this country, and it remains so today.
For 160 years, the narrative has been the white narrative of the Civil War.
Every day the sun comes up over that mountain, the state is declaring it a monument to the Confederacy.
That's historical. That Confederate memorial will be there because the people back in those days who cared enough about their families wanted to honor them.
I think that if we want to create a world that is actually accepting, you would understand why that's unacceptable.
Sure, there's good, bad, and ugly in every story. We just need to continue to focus on the good and not the bad.
Now, you can make a lot of good, credible arguments for a lot of different solutions for Stone Mountain, but any of those absolutely comes with the obligation to have a honest historical reckoning with how that monument got there and what it represents.
The truth needs to be told about the meaning and the intent of these memorials.
Also, the harm that has been created and felt by Black Americans.
That is a difficult truth, but it is a truth that must be confronted.
Most people, once they really understood the history behind that monument, would say, oh yeah, I better understand now why.
We can't let it continue to be, which it has been for decades, is a shrine, not only to the lost cause, but also to much more pernicious, far-right, racist organizations.
We got to deal with this. And we got to deal with it in an open and honest way.
All Georgians have a stake in this issue.
Right now, the carving is explicitly protected by Georgia law.
And the fact that the state of Georgia still has this direct connection to Stone Mountain does create a higher burden.
But I like to think of that as an opportunity to have that historical reckoning that we need.
So it's important to come together and talk about these things and be ready to be emotional and angry.
And so these are tense conversations, but there are conversations that must be had.
Well, I just don't like it when you start dealing with history. You start wanting to erase it. You want to change it. It was important then, and it should still stay important today.
We're not talking about erasing history.
We're talking about enormous issues in our country, about our racial divide and our political divide through the context of a Confederate monument.
This really speaks to how complicated this issue is.
These are the core issues that we have always had since the founding of the nation.
And so as a nation, we have to admit that yes, our country was built upon the backs of people who were enslaved. And that enslavement came from ideologies that were very racist ideologies. We have to admit that. We cannot live out the ideals that we say represent who we are as a people. There's no way we can do that unless we're willing to listen to each other.
I think that that's so vital for an ideal nation, you know, an ideal society.
And until we use historic places to foster truth, education, reconciliation, and healing, then we are not harnessing the full power of our historic built environment, the power of art, and what it communicates about who we once were, but also who we are in the present and who we want to be in the future.
So this comes from the official code of Georgia 50-3-1C. Any other provision of law notwithstanding, the memorial to the heroes of the Confederate States of America, graven upon the face of Stone Mountain, shall never be altered, removed, concealed, or obscured in any fashion, and shall be preserved and protected for all time as a tribute to the bravery and heroism of the citizens of this state who suffered and died in their cause. There is no clearer statement of the lost cause anywhere than is here and codified in Georgia law. All right, so one thing you might have noticed is we didn't say what to do about it. We didn't say blow it up. We didn't say anything like that. And what we're trying to do is to get people the idea of oh, I didn't know that. Let me think about it more. And to spark that sort of curiosity about it. I don't know if we, you could tell me if we achieve that. And we're trying to do it in a way that is not too provocative so that people can't hear it. One of the things that we try to do at the History Center is to talk not in jargon, but in plain English. I'm a securities lawyer, so they got beat into me by the damn SEC, and they were actually right. I come out of law school thinking I had all these great words, and they didn't like them at all. So that's what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is to get the conversation, get the facts out. And so like tonight I brought a timeline that you could take if you like for some people here. All you have to do is to read the timeline. You don't have to have a whole lot of English on it. We put some on there. Here's what happened, and then think about that. And so, like I said, we're not advocating that it be blown off the mountain. We're advocating telling the truth about it. And I'll get some comments, but I'll tell you what's gone on since this a little bit. The governor, Kemp, has actually appointed an African American chair of the Stone Mountain Memorial Association, and he has appropriated $11 million in the budget to take a museum at the base of the mountain, which had about this much about the Klan in it before, literally this big, and to have them tell the truth about the mountain. That's what they're saying. I've met with the head of the Stone Mountain Memorial Association. I met with the person that they hired to do it. And I believe that's what they're going to do. They said they're going to take our timeline, and they're going to take a lot of the stuff that we did, and they're going to turn it into an exhibit. And what the great opportunity there is, most Confederate monuments, what you can do to terms of contextualization, which is what I've always proposed in many cases, is to have a big reader rail or something like that. These plaques that go on things, I'm an anti-plaquer. You put a plaque on something and it disappears into it, and nobody will ever read it. But if you need to take these objects and turn them from objects of veneration into artifacts. And that's what a reader rail does. Well, at Stone Mountain, which is the biggest, baddest of all the Confederate monuments, it actually already has a museum in its base. And so you can really tell a full story about the mountain there. No other Confederate monument has that opportunity. Well, if there was one that needed it, it's this one. So that's what's going on in terms of that, and I've seen they're moving some of those flags that you saw there. They're moving them away from the base of the mountain. They're doing some things like that. I sort of see him engaging in what General Fabius did, a Fabian transaction, which is General Fabius would fall back and fall back and fall back a little at a time, and then get the right place to. Robert E. Lee was really good at that, to mount a counteroffensive. But that's what he's doing right now, I think right now, trying to navigate through, it's so hot out there, with the sons of Confederate veterans and then the people that are really to the, crazy types, that you saw in there. They're out there, they show up. So that's what he's doing, and I think, that's a reasonable way to go. And I saw him at Rotary, Atlanta Rotary, and I sort of, jumped in line. He was getting his food. Said, "Governor, I just want to tell you, I'm trying to help you." And I don't know if he believed it or not, but anyway, he's been very, very friendly, and so we are, and so we're the people that are trying to say, here are the issues, here are the facts. As a community, we need to figure out what to do about it. This is not an Atlanta thing. It's not a Stone Mountain thing. It's a statewide thing. It's just like the bookend of the flag, right? And it's the same issue. It's all, and that's why I'm honored to be asked to come down here. I've been to Columbus to speak. Went to Stone Mountain. Went to Athens, and that was great because the head of the Stone Mountain Memorial Commission is a Baptist preacher from Athens, African American Baptist preacher. He came and he watched this, and he just said, "We're going to tell the truth." And I'm like, "Okay." So it's been really interesting. So what I would love to hear is what your thoughts are and your questions. And I'm happy to answer them from my perspective.
We used to live in Atlanta for 18 years, and we would go to Stone Mountain to see the laser light show, and that's just totally enjoyable. So
Yeah.
I don't have to get involved in politics or history, and I hate this group, I hate that group. Just enjoy the show.
Yeah, and I'm not, and again, I think one of the really interesting things is who is going to the mountain now, right? Who's there? It is probably the most diverse place in Atlanta in terms of you go out there and you see who's running around that mountain, who's actually going there. It's not the people Martin Griffin had in mind. And that's really, and so people are using the park and they're using it in spite of that. Now, people aren't going and renting hotel rooms there for conferences because of the carving, and so the state's having an issue with that. But right, you can use it, and most people ignore it, or it's not. They just don't pay attention to it. But it's there and it's looming. Yes, ma'am.
As you've traveled around the state, what kind of response are you getting? Is one question. Are people pushing back? Are they saying, "Gee, I didn't know that"? And then the other question is, how can you have reconciliation when there's banning of books and denial of teaching in schools?
Oh, okay. So far, mostly where I've gone, people have been polite. And they might not have told me what they really thought, but no, people have asked direct questions, and that's been fine, because people come to this with a lot of emotion, right, and a lot of baggage, and a lot of things that they were told. I grew up going out there, and I loved when the Indians would attack the train when I was a kid. Can't do that now, but that was really fun, and I have all those great memories about that, but I wasn't thinking about the carving, though my grandfather did give me one of those $50 that they sold in 1925. The United States Mint did to raise money for the carving. They sold about $3 million worth. That they ended up. That money went away, but. So I guess the answer is people have been polite, but people don't know, and a lot of times they just are sitting there trying to process this, and then maybe they're trying to come up with something to say, "Hey, but what about this?" And what I say is, you don't have to agree or change your mind. It's just think about it, and then the question will become, well, what do we do about it? And I am not here to tell us that there's a great solution to this that's going to make everybody happy. I don't think blowing it up is going to happen. So I just don't think it's going to. If you took a poll, I don't think it would happen. But I think people, the more they learn about it, will say, "Oh," like Cynthia says, "Oh, I didn't know." Now I understand why somebody has that opinion. You don't have to agree with it, but you can understand why they have it. And in terms of the issues that are going around about banning books and things like that, We, at the History Center, we just believe in getting the facts out and trying to tell it in a way that's not loaded, and the terms aren't too loaded. Here we have people speaking their own mind, and we tried to keep it within relative bounds so that people could hear it. But we're very clear about the facts, about what we believe about the war was about slavery, things like that are sort of, bedrock, but we don't try to shame people or blame people for believing something else. When people grew up, I had grandparents like this, who told us, all this stuff about the lost cause, because that's what their parents told them. And my grandparents were in the war. And, and the UDC textbooks and all this stuff, if you want to, know about propaganda and textbooks, just go back to the 1950s and 60s. And the UDC was awesome in terms of their ability to control the narrative. And so we're dealing with the remnants of that today because that got so embedded in the culture. And so there's reasons people believe that, and so that's why we have the conversation. Yes, sir. Well, it was an intra-Klan fight. Borglum was in the Klan, and there were other people in the Klan that had different political views in terms of who ought to be running the Klan. And the Klan, really went off the rails in a couple of years and self-destructed because the leaders ended up being crooks and womanizers and and drunks and everything else, all the things they said they weren't going to be, right? Just, but they got in a fight. And so what he did was he ended up breaking his maquette, the big thing, and then fleeing the state at that time. And he wasn't in the Klan when he came down because the Klan didn't exist. But once he got down here, the people that were in charge of the Confederate Stone Mountain Memorial Association at that time were in the Klan. Most of them were in the Klan, like the Hollins Randolph, who was their lawyer and great-great-great-grandson of Thomas Jefferson, was in the Klan, and was the secretary, and he was the lawyer for the Klan. And then there was the treasurer, the person collecting the money, was Nathan Bedford Forrest II, the grandson of Nathan Bedford Forrest, who had been one of the original founders of the original Klan. So it was all mixed up, and I don't know, the Klan politics is apparently very complicated, like a lot of politics. So. Yes, sir.
What are the most important audiences for you to get this story to? Is it Rotary clubs? Is it school boards? Is it Governor Kemp's cabinet? Governor Kemp? Who are your top 3 or 4 audiences? It's people who can have influence on the legislature ultimately, right? They're going to have to deal with it at some point. But it's really a broad Georgia issue, and you can't take it to everybody and expect everybody to agree with you. But we can try to do as much of it as we can. It's been on Georgia Public Broadcasting statewide. We've had almost 70,000 people watch it on YouTube. It's been on Atlanta Public Television, and we're trying to get it out there. We don't have a real target audience because we're not trying to change a law tomorrow. We're trying to get the information out there so that we can have a reasonable conversation about it. The issue, the big issue to me is not the carving, it's the law that makes the whole 3,000 acres a memorial to the Confederacy, which I think is a problem in the 21st century. I don't think we don't need to, bash the people in that era, but we don't necessarily need to uphold them either as a state, because you got to be really careful who you put on a pedestal. It gets complicated. And so that, to me, if I were to cut to the chase and said I have a solution, it would be one that doesn't make anybody happy, which would be leave the monument protected and make the state take the memorial piece off of it, turn it into an artifact, and let's talk about it. but we don't have to have the state every day, venerating it, saying on our behalf that that's what we're doing. That's why I read that at the end. That to me is the issue. And that all came in 2001. They didn't write that in 1888. That was 2001, and that was part of that compromise. And I was there watching that whole thing because George Hooks from Americus was real involved trying to help Governor Barnes get through it. And so he came in and with others, and we had the portrait of Robert E. Lee that used to be in the Confederate old folks home in Atlanta, and it was in storage. And George said, "Could we have that?" And I was chair of the History Center at that time, and I'm like, "Hell yeah, you can have that." It was huge. It's taking up a lot of our storage, and we were going to put it out. And so he takes it down to the Capitol, and they have this big ceremony, and they hang it in the Capitol at that time. And and Barnes comes in, and I was like, I'm going to go see this because I love train wrecks. So Barnes comes in, and I'm sitting there, and they have this ceremony and all this is going on. And then when he walks in, the Sons of Confederate Veterans all turn their backs on him. It was just great. I love the theater, the whole thing. But I think it's still down there. And anyway, so that was part of it, protecting these things, which at that time nobody thought they were endangered, but it was just something to do. So, did I answer your question?
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was now. Yes, sir.
Just an observation. And I think we could probably find a strong minority of people here in this room that one thing, obviously I'm not from these parts. And one thing I've learned so much about here is that so many people around here can trace their family back to pre-American Revolution and such. So when people are denigrating the monuments, they're talking about a lot of people's grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, and so it gets very, I imagine, again, my people didn't come over until after 1900. So it was, but that, I don't know, it makes it very personal.
Yeah, it does, and all my ancestors, were losers, but I love them. I love them, and we. I heard stories growing up about all of them in the war and what they did, and that was fun. But that doesn't mean I have to put a statue up to them for that purpose, for something else. I mean, I don't. It's one of these things. It's like to hear my grandparents talk about their grandparents and how their grandparents loved them, and I love my grandparents, right? So those people would have loved me, is the way I look at it, we're not that far back. But this is a bigger issue, and it's about how other people feel. And that's one of the things that we need to think about. How is it for other people? And what are we trying to remember or misremember? Like I said in there, it's all about heritage. Heritage is history with all the bad parts left out. So, like, if you think about it, like Scottish Highland Games, that's heritage, okay? Confederate monuments aren't, that they put up and they just think of all the good stuff. That's heritage, but that's not history. And family history is not necessarily history either, because you remember it differently. But yes, sir.
Did the name Walker Hancock come into view for you as a sculptor?
Yeah, he was, right before.
64, right?
Yeah, it was before 64. But he didn't get very far with it. But yes, he was there, and then Faulkner came in and finished it. And I'm not sure exactly what happened, and and why they spent from 1958 to 1964 figuring out what to do. They bought the mountain, and like, okay, we got this. How are we going to do this? And then they fired Hancock, I think, or he resigned, and then Faulkner was like his assistant, and he picked it up and ran with it. And it was, and they restarted the carving like 6 days after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed. I mean, a coincidence. But if you think about what was going on in the civil rights era and what was going on in the mountain and in Atlanta in the paper, people were getting really upset because they thought that the horse of Stonewall Jackson looked like a mule. The big article in the paper, and at the same time they were hosing people down in Birmingham. I mean, the cognitive dissonance was crazy. All right, and then they come in. In 1970, they dedicated Lester Maddox as governor. It was the best thing that ever happened to Jimmy Carter. As they dedicated before he got in, and then they brought Spiro Agnew came down to dedicate it. And people in Atlanta were pissed off because they thought that Nixon ought to come down and do it, and not Spiro Agnew. And then the Emory professors were upset, not because it was a lost cause deal, but because they thought that Spiro Agnew was anti-intellectual. So, I mean, there's all kinds of crazy going on then. Oh, and then my favorite thing about the, and we couldn't put all this in here, but the favorite thing about when they dedicated it, they got William Holmes Border, the African-American preacher from Wheat Street Baptist Church in Atlanta, to give an invocation. Well, James Venable, a relative of the other Venable, was the head of the Klan at that time, and he said, I'm not coming to the dedication because they have a black man, I think that's the word he used, I'm not sure, who's dedicating it, and the whole war was fought about slavery. And I'm like, out of the mouths of Klansmen comes the truth, right? I mean, that's how crazy this whole thing is. And so there's just lots of stories like that. And people just don't know.
Hi, I'm David Lane, and I actually had a great-great-grandfather on the south side, and I had one who fought for the Union in South Alabama. But what I was going to say is, you know, I think getting the legislature to change the language in that law and change that law is absolutely key. But I also think that seems like it could be incredibly difficult and take a very long time. So one thought I had was that maybe we need a ballot initiative in the state. It would give the legislature some cover and, you know, make it a statewide vote or something like that. Because I just don't see the legislature changing and being able to do that for quite a while. Do you have any ideas about where the legislature is on this? Are they farther than they were in 2000?
I don't know. I mean, my prediction is, given the way the world is right now, this isn't going to be the highest thing on their list to do. In terms of, you know, I like to poke snakes, but they don't necessarily like to do that. And that there's a consensus that would even get it to a ballot initiative, or that if there's a ballot initiative, what would it be? You know, to change the law and leave it protected, or just to change the law, or to, you know, or option 3, blow it up. I mean, change the
language and instead, you know, say what it is and what they intend it to be, and, you know, that it's going to be the contextualized archive, you know,
well,
something like that.
The DeKalb County delegation introduced a law, a proposed bill at the end after crossover day, so it'll be live this year, but it's not really alive, but it's there. And what theirs is they just stripped everything in there that said anything about the Confederate out. And all that stuff, all that flowery language came out, but they left it protected in that. And so they've essentially done that. There's something out there that somebody can react to. I don't expect a presidential election year is going to go anywhere. It might go at the end of second term of a governor. I tried to get Governor Deal to look at this. I gave him all this stuff, snuck it through his lawyer and all this stuff, I'm always trying to be helpful. I don't bring this up in public. And apparently he just looked at that, he's like, just, you know, he wasn't going to go out with that, I don't think. But that would have been a heavy lift for him even then. And that's before a lot of this recent stuff that has come up.
You're a historian, and one of the things you deal with is putting whatever these artifacts are out there for people to look at. Now, it seems to me
So let's take your garden variety Confederate monument on the courthouse square, okay? You know, which are everywhere. What we've said in our Confederate Monument Interpretation Guide is the status quo is not an option. Leaving it untended to, or, you know, talking about the truth is so either tell the truth about it or move it or remove it. That's sort of where we were. It's like, just don't leave it alone. But you can leave it there if the community wants to and thinks they can live with it, or you can move it to the side. You know, some of the really issues that come up are when you have these things right in front of the courthouse, and somebody has to go by there to get married, who's African American, or be sentenced, or, you know, that's an issue. And I hadn't focused on that until like 6 or 7 years ago. I was like, oh, they're just harmless, they're kind of pathetic, right? You know, we lost them, and here we are. But they really do have a power that I just didn't realize. And so one way to deal with it, put it off to the side, tell the truth about it. Maybe you can leave it there and tell the truth about it. Depends on the community, or maybe you just have to remove it. But we don't try to say what works in any particular case. Now, in terms, you know, what we're just trying to do is get the facts out so that people can see why that people believe it. Why, you know, particularly people who look like me, why black people are offended by them. You know, what are the real issues? You know, and what we keep telling people is, don't believe me, believe the people who erected them. Go read what they said when they erected them. You know, go to the newspapers, do your research. Don't believe what I say. Like Marvin Griffin, we just put Marvin Griffin up there, right? You know, I don't have to say anything about Marvin Griffin. He says it himself. He's not embarrassed about that. So anyway, that's what we've tried to do. It's just to get people the information to make their own decisions and to learn more about it. In this environment right now, that's about as good as you can do. But if I go and try to tell you, you know, you have to do it because, you know, it's racist, you're racist if you don't think so, that's not very helpful. And that's not going to it's not going to move it. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Fantastic and very enlightening. I've always considered myself to be somewhat of a forward thinker, maybe even a socially liberal person, but my children have challenged that. Basically, you are so old, you need to be more active if you're really going to make a change. And I have started understanding a lot more of what they are saying to me as time goes by. But, you know, look around this room. I'm sorry, but this is a very white room. It's not lost on me that we don't have any people of color here. And I kind of wonder why. But not seriously. If we are so compelled to do something about this, I think that everyone in this room could go home and make a phone call to their representative and say, look, this is an issue that needs to be addressed, because the changes don't come from Atlanta. They come from out here. We make the changes. And if we are so compelled to make a change, I would challenge everyone to pick up the phone tomorrow morning and call their senators.
Yeah. I just be. Yeah, well, yeah, I have no voice. What I would, just tell them to watch the film. That would be fine with me. Just say, watch the film and see if that, just listen to it. That's all. And because right now nothing's going to happen. It's just not going to, I don't think. But I think it'll take years. And it's years of people just getting more exposed to the information and then saying, okay, maybe we can compromise. And compromise is a bad word right now.
Well, nothing changes on its own. There has to be a catalyst. And we are the catalyst for change.
Yeah. The catalyst, I think, out at Stone Mountain so far has been money. Money is always a catalyst, and they're losing money. And so they are trying to do things that will allow them to do that. Well, that we don't have. I don't think we have the money for that, or the will, and I think we've probably torn up enough of the mountain already. But I think there are other ways of having counter monuments. To me, the greatest counter monument is who's going to is going there right now. Who's going to the park right now? It is everybody. And they are every day, they walk into that park, they are saying, we're here too. And I think it's very poignant, but I do think that the state ultimately just needs to get out of the memorializing the Confederacy business and just tell the truth about it. So that's where we are. And thank y'all for having me.